In the early 20th century, along the frozen border regions of the Soviet Union, a German Shepherd collapsed in the snow, not from a bullet or from exhaustion in the ordinary sense. Its coat simply wasn't built for what was being asked of it. The Soviet military had a problem. They loved the German Shepherd, its intelligence, its obedience, its usefulness as a soldier's dog. What they didn't love was watching that same dog shut down in temperatures the German breeders in Alsace and Bavaria had never had to plan for. So, the Soviets did what the Soviet state did with almost everything in this period. They didn't import a solution. They engineered one. That engineered dog is still alive today, still working the same borders, still largely unknown outside the countries that built it. It's called the East European Shepherd, the VEO, standing for the Vostochno-Evropskaya Ovcharka. To understand the breed, you have to understand the complaint that started it. Through the 1920s, the young Soviet Union had been importing German Shepherds for military and police work, following the same logic every European power had followed since the breed's formalization under Max von Stephanitz a generation earlier. The dog was smart, biddable, and versatile, everything a modern security state wanted. But the Soviet Union wasn't Germany. It stretched across climates the breed had never been tested against. The deep continental winters of Siberia, the exposed frontier zones where border guard dogs worked outdoors for hours in temperatures the original breed standard had never accounted for. Handlers reported German Shepherds struggling with frostbite, with coats too thin for the job, with a constitution suited to Central Europe and nowhere else. A state that ran everything from steel production to grain quotas as a matter of central planning was never going to accept that as a permanent limitation. If the dog wasn't fit for the climate, the dog would be redesigned until it was. Breeding work aimed at correcting this began in the Ukrainian SSR, where imported German Shepherd stock was crossed with hardier native and regional working dogs to build size, coat density, and cold tolerance into the line. Different accounts place parallel efforts in Belarus as well, with military-backed kennels pursuing the same goal from the other direction. A reminder that this wasn't one breeder's project, but a distributed, state-directed effort running across multiple Soviet republics at once. What united every version of the program was the target: a dog with the trainability of the German Shepherd and the resilience of an animal that had evolved for the Eastern Front's climate, not Bavaria's. One of the earliest formal efforts was the Red Star Kennel, established in 1924, which became a hub for organized breeding of this new type. But the real engineering happened over the following 3 decades, and it wasn't a single cross. Between the 1930s and the 1950s, Soviet breeders worked through several distinct bloodlines, each solving a different piece of the problem. The cold tolerance issue was solved largely through the East Siberian Laika, a Spitz-type hunting dog from one of the harshest inhabited climates on Earth, and one of the most cold-adapted dog types in existence. Laika blood brought exactly what the German Shepherd lacked: a coat and a metabolism built for Siberian winters, not Central European ones. Alongside the Laika, native Ovcharka lines, the broad Russian term for regional shepherd and guarding dogs, they were folded in to reinforce hardiness and working temperament suited to the terrain. Size and raw physical presence came from a different direction entirely. Molosser and Mastiff-type dogs were introduced into the program specifically to add bulk, bone density, and the kind of blunt protective instinct that a mid-sized herding breed like the German Shepherd simply didn't have on its own. This is the cross that explains why they can stand several inches taller at the shoulder than its German ancestor with a noticeably heavier frame to match. And crucially, the breeding program wasn't only for the cold. The Soviet Union's southern republics ran hot, arid climates a world away from Siberia, and a dog built purely for snow and ice would have failed there just as badly as the original German Shepherd had failed in the north. So, the program was tuned for range as much as extremity. a dog that could hold up on a frozen border post in the north and hotter weather in the south, without needing two separate breeds to do it. That dual climate demand is a big part of why the breed ended up as versatile and as widely deployed across the Soviet Union's entire perimeter as it did. It would take until the breed bred true across all of these crosses, cold tolerance from the Laika, size and protective drive from the Ovcharkas, adaptability layered on top, before it could be called a breed in its own right rather than an improved variant of the German Shepherd. Then came 1941, and the Eastern Front tore through everything the breeding program had built. This wasn't a war fought on the periphery of the Soviet Union. It was fought through the exact territories where this new dog was being developed. Kennels were destroyed. Breeding lines were scattered or endangered alongside the people who kept them. Years of the deadliest land war in human history is not a survivable environment for a breeding program that had barely stabilized. When the war ended in 1945, something unexpected happened. Germany itself became the source of recovery. As Soviet forces occupied German territory, large numbers of German shepherds were brought back from war, animals that had, ironically, never been available for legal import before the war began. That fresh German bloodstock was folded back into the surviving Soviet lines, both replenishing numbers and, in the eyes of later breeders, muddying the distinctiveness the pre-war program had been working toward. It's a strange loop worth sitting with. The dog invented specifically to be more than a German Shepherd was partly rebuilt, after the war that nearly destroyed it, using German Shepherds taken as spoils of that same war. By the 1950s, the breed had a name, Vostochno-Evropskaya Ovcharka, the East European Shepherd, and a growing reputation inside Soviet institutions. A breed standard was approved in 1955, refined further in 1964 under the Sinologic Council of the Soviet Ministry of Agriculture, which also began formally tracking pedigrees. This is where the breed stops being a climate adaptation project and starts becoming something closer to a state symbol. The Soviet military adopted it for border patrol and guard duty. Police forces used them for detection and protection work. But its most telling association was with the KGB, and this is where the breed's history takes its strangest institutional turn. KGB kennels reportedly kept only solid black shepherds. Not black and tan, not sable, black and only black. If a litter bred within that program produced even a single non-black puppy, the entire litter were allegedly destroyed, and that pairing wasn't repeated. This wasn't about temperament or working ability. Coat color carried no functional advantage in guard work. It was aesthetic control exercised through breeding, an intelligence agency deciding what its dogs were allowed to look like, and being willing to eliminate entire litters to enforce it. It's a small detail, but it says something larger about how the Soviet state related to the animals in its service. This wasn't a breed shaped primarily by working trials or fanciers debating structure at a show ring. It was shaped in part by institutions that treated a dog's coat like a uniform. For decades, the breed thrived precisely because it operated inside a closed system. Soviet borders limited outside imports, state kennels controlled breeding standards, and demand from the military and police gave the breed a guaranteed institutional home. Then, in 1991, that entire system disappeared. The collapse of the Soviet Union didn't just end a political structure, it ended the conditions that had kept the East European gene pool distinct. Borders opened. German Shepherds, along with Belgian Malinois and other Western working breeds, flooded into the newly accessible former Soviet states, often viewed by working handlers as more refined or more internationally credible than the homegrown alternative. State-run breeding programs lost their funding and their purpose almost overnight. Breeders who had spent 70 years building a distinct type increasingly turned back to German sires to improve their lines. The same move that had happened after 1945. Except this time, there was no coordinated post-war rebuilding effort to correct course. By some accounts, the breed came close to being reabsorbed entirely back into the gene pool it had been created to diverge from. It survived because a small number of committed breeders refused to let it disappear. Clubs like Fauna in St. Petersburg kept working lines going through the chaos of the 1990s, and in 1993, the Union of Fanciers of the breed formed in Moscow specifically to coordinate what remained of the organized breeding. The Russian Kynological Federation eventually granted recognition, and the breed persists today across Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, still used by military and border services in all three. Here's the thing worth sitting with as this dog fades from most people's radar entirely. The VEO wasn't created because someone loved dogs and wanted to build a better one. It was created because a state found an animal's natural limitations inconvenient and had both the resources and the will to override them through 70 years of deliberate breeding. Its near extinction in the 1990s wasn't caused by disease or disaster. It was caused by the simple removal of the institutional scaffolding that had defined the breed's entire existence. And it survived that collapse not because of any government program, but because a handful of individual breeders decided a Soviet-engineered guard dog was worth saving on its own terms. The East European Shepherd is, in a strange way, one of the purest case studies in what happens when you take an animal shaped almost entirely by institutional will, and then remove the same institution. Most breeds built like that don't survive the transition. This one did. Barely. And almost nobody outside 3 countries knows its name. I just want to say a massive thank you to Shepherd Major Grom, East River VEO, and Hadar's the Eastern European Shepherd for letting me use their clips, with their links below to check out their great work. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what other topics you'd like me to cover. See you soon.